already, and we're going to do it here in Wake County. Begin to create home ownership and generational wealth accumulation. If you'd like to come with me and you're free Thursday morning at 10, please talk to me. I'd like you to come. It is true that resources create time and resources create bandwidth. And when we have fewer resources, it makes it more important that we make hard choices. When we are more strapped for time, more strapped for resource and bandwidth, and we make those choices now with the added complication of more triggering, more anxiety, more fatigue, we have to factor in that there are limits. There just is not enough time. So this unspoken belief that we have as Americans, that we can do it all, it cuts across economic strata. But doing it all is a fantasy. We saw last week, as soon as we get set A done, our brains have this automatic creation mechanism that kicks in. Now we create set B. Our brains are hardwired to find more rocks than can fit into a human life. If you remember that metaphor a couple weeks ago. So to solve the Ecclesiastes problem, that there are limits, 80 years if we're lucky, 24 hours in a day, we have to make these hard choices because we cannot do it all. Can't taste it all, can't experience it all, especially when our resources are limited. Well, today I want to talk about another way that our American culture works against us making the hard choices. So today let's talk about one of our society's cardinal sins. By the way, that word cardinal in cardinal sin is one, you might have heard it as one of the 7 deadly sins. That's the word cardinal sins. There's a list, 7 of them. This is not on that list. This is on the American list of cardinal sins. Settling, that's an American sin. To settle. I could have had a lot more memes on this slide. I deleted half of the ones that I put on because it was just too crowded. This is way too easy to find. You could just find way too many of these. Never, never, never settle. Grind it out, never settle. Make it happen, never settle. You deserve, never settle. Hustle for it, but never, never, never settle. And here's the thing. The same thing that we saw about pushing against limits applies here as well. There is some good that happens when we don't settle. There's a reason why it's an American value. Good things happen when we push against limits and don't settle. I found this article, but I could have found 100 just like it. Don't give up your dreams, contend for the best. Don't be mediocre, work hard. Be the best version of yourself. Don't settle, don't settle, don't settle. And again, there is good reason why we hear that theme over and over and over again. We hear it in commencement speeches. We see it on magazine covers, blog posts, social media memes. It's everywhere. But sometimes we should settle. And how in the world would we ever know when it's that time? Because nobody is out there preaching the gospel of, well, in this instance and in this context, yeah, it might be, this settling might be the right thing to do. The American gospel of not settling is preached as a binary choice. You can live life to its fullest, or you can settle. And when you put it that way, well, who is ever going to settle? I'm not going to settle. But it turns out that's not how settling works. It turns out if you want to live life to its fullest, you have to settle. Because 80 years, 24 hours. Now, it might help us as we're thinking about this if we replace the word on and replace the word for with the word on. Settle on instead of settle for. So let me give you a couple of stories to illustrate it. I'm going to tell an extreme story, but I think the principle applies even in the more mundane ways. Here's story 1. Say you're 19. And you're smart in a good in school kind of way. and say that all the people that you respect tell you, hey kid, you're smart in a good in school kind of way. So you know what you should do? You should go into business because that's where the smart kids go, and that's where you'll make a bucket of money, and that's where you'll earn social standing. You should go into business. And if at 19 you realize, yeah, I probably could. I could probably do a life of business and I probably would thrive, but it really doesn't feel like me. And if after that, the same people that you respect come back to you and say, hey kid, you're smart in a good in school kind of way. You know what you should do? You should become a lawyer because that's where the smart kids go. And that's where you're going to make a bucket of money. And that's where you're going to earn social standing. And also, kid, politics. You've got politics written all over you. Go be a lawyer. And now if at age 23, having changed your major to be able to get into law school, and now that your peers are getting back their LSAT scores and you realize, I'm smarter than that kid and he's going to get into that school, well then, okay then. Now, if you realize I could have a life in law or in politics, I probably would thrive, but it just doesn't feel like me. And then if, in a magical moment of clarity, you realize how important human spirituality is, but at almost the same moment you realize that church is a dying institution, and you realize that religion is dying, and who wants a career in a dying industry? Who wants to not make a bucket of money, and who wants to have social standing just shy of ditch digging? But if you're cocky enough to think, hey, I could probably change that. I could probably rethink the whole minister thing. I could probably rethink church. Hell, I could probably rethink religion. Well, go through that process that many people go through some version of, and here's what comes next. Settling. Because you can't spend your career rethinking religion and fully engaging in business. You can't spend your career rethinking religion and be a partner in a litigation firm. You have to settle. You have to settle on. Now, you probably didn't recognize that, given how cleverly I disguised that story. But that's my story. But really, it's everybody's story. Settle on something that you want in your life, and living life to the fullest really demands that you settle on that thing. Now, you cannot develop and fully live a life of business or law of religion without settling on religion or life, business or life or religion. Flit between them, and we don't do any one of them well. So again, kind of an extreme case. We've all made some version of that decision. We've settled on a career. But even though that's an extreme case, the principle filters down to everyday life in just 100 ways where we don't make those hard choices. That principle doesn't get as applied. Our yeses and our nos are not as thoroughly thought out. I settled on grandparenting. I gave it a really big yes. Made a decision on a day, looked at my life, and I realized I'm going to have to say no to this and this and this and this and this in order to say yes in the way that I want to say yes to this and this and this and this. It happened because I'd gone to a funeral of a kid that we knew in our church, and I heard how he talked about his grandfather, and I realized, okay, this is going to be one of my yeses. I am going to have to say no to a lot of things, and I've said no to a lot of things. You'll hear in a moment, I have given another really big yes to meditation. And I don't even like meditation that much. We choose, and then we dedicate ourselves to the thing that matters most. And that is not a thing that our culture is particularly good at. The whole gospel of don't settle actually makes it harder to live life to its fullest. I ordered this book. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if it's ready for Beth's Amazon list, but boy, I really do appreciate that Beth is putting together an Amazon list. But here's what the blurb said, and I loved what the blurb said. It said, we've all had the experience of browsing Netflix options, not committing to a show, not committing to a movie, until eventually it's time to go to bed and we don't watch anything. The author, the blurb continues, argues that this is the defining characteristic of our moment, keeping our options open, stuck in infinite browsing mode, swiping endless dating options, not committing to a partner, not making any decision that closes us off from a potentially better option. We yearn for purpose, the blurb says. We yearn for community. We yearn for depth. We yearn for purpose, community, and depth, but those require dedication to one thing. That's making the hard choices. Here's the second story, also extreme. I almost blew it with Denise. I was so afraid of making a mistake, I almost blew it. We were both from divorced families. My family's divorce was very ugly. By God, I will not do that to my children, I committed. So closing the door by choosing, making the hard choice was very, very scary. Now, this was Denise. Now, if you've gotten to know Denise, what was wrong with me? But in the back of my mind was this tension that comes, I might be settling. Now, I am glad that I didn't settle for other women that I dated earlier, but when I met someone wonderful, it was very hard to know, okay, then settling was good, but now settling is bad. It's just vice versa. It's just not clear. It's not easy. The gospel of don't settle drove me to put impossible expectations on her. You might have noticed I'm kind of an abstract thinker. So I thought to myself, of course, I will have an abstract thinker partner. Except the thing that most attracted me to Denise was how she arranged and how she worked in the very concrete world. So yes, sweetie, I would like you to be this, and I would like you to be the opposite of this. Do that, would you? Because God forbid I might be settling. Now here's how crazy it got. I think Denise is beautiful. You probably agree. But having saturated in don't ever settle, she mentioned one day when we were dating, you know, I come from Swedish ancestry and we have big ankles in my family and I wish I didn't have big ankles. You'll want to check them out before we leave church. Now, by then, I had seen this woman. I had seen her, okay? And in all of that seeing, I had never noticed the diameter of her ankles. But now, oh my God! I spent 2 weeks in internal turmoil. I might be settling ankles. So again, a second absurd story, all right? But here's the thing. Saturate long enough in don't settle, and often we do get absurd. If you look at our culture, we are going to absurd lengths in our not settling gospel. When we saturate ourselves in no limits, when we saturate ourselves in don't settle, we often don't see the absurdities of how we live our lives. Now, do not judge this book by its cover, because it is probably the ugliest book cover on one of the best books I've ever read. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. It's a good companion series, a companion book for this series, and in it there's this story. It's probably not a true story because everybody now who tells a story attaches it to somebody famous. This one got attached to Warren Buffett. I'm always skeptical that these things actually happen. But even if it's not a true story, it's kind of a true story. So in the story, Buffett's pilot asks him, how do you set your priorities? Which is another way of talking about how do you set your yes? How do you decide what your yes is, what your no is? Well, Buffett says, first of all, you make a list. 20 things you want out of life. 20 things you want out of life. So spend a week, spend a month, talk to your people, visit the issue, then revisit the issue, then question it, and then question it again. What do you want out of life? Come up with 20 things. And then arrange those things in order from most to least important. And then take the top 5 and look at all the areas that you live your life and organize those areas around those top 5. Make sure those things show up in your calendar. Make sure those things show up in your budget. Make sure that that's where your time goes. Make sure that that's where your energy goes. Make sure that those things show up in the conversations that you have. Make sure that those things show up around the friendships that you have. Make sure that those 5 show up in all the places where you are making your life. Now, the rest of the list from 6 through 15, and here the author speaks to what would be most of our expectations. They're commonly held expectations. We would expect that the rest of those would be second-tier priorities. Those would be things that we would work on when there's extra time. Those are the things that we would work on when there's extra money, extra bandwidth. But the story surprises and says, no, just the opposite. Those are the priorities that you must avoid at all costs, because they are actually tempting enough to tempt you away from what matters most. They are the enemy of the 5. Settling is not as easy as saying no to stuff that we really don't want, but just kind of gets sucked into our lives. That's a good start. Your phone probably has a focus mode on it, saying no to distractions so that we can be more focused. Good idea to say yes to what we're working on, to say no to multitasking, but settling is not that easy. Settling is actually deciding to say no to things that we want in our lives, and doing it because there are other things that we want more. Latin for decide, decidere, means to cut off, to slice away options. It's got the same root as homicide, as suicide. Kill those things, because there's never enough time. There's never enough time. We must always settle. We must always settle on. So you will not be surprised that here again we come to revisit working the circle, because those are very difficult decisions to make on an ongoing day-to-day basis, because those things show up and invite us to say yes. And the ancients have a word for those times when we don't choose that yes. They call it discernment. And the ancients have a curriculum to help us develop our capacity for discernment. And that's what the circle is. So I'm going to talk about just one of those categories of practice. I'm going to talk about contemplative. Now, I mentioned earlier, we've resumed morning meditation. Tuesdays, Thursdays are now added in. We do it weekdays now, 6:30. Also, Sue is starting a centering prayer group. Met first time this morning. I think they're going to meet monthly. We're getting back to the important things now that kind of the rush of moving is over, because discernment, because making hard choices. Now, I've been the driver for morning meditation at 6:30 because I need meditation. Recently, the social media team texted me asking me for some inspiring meditation quotes. And I happen to, over the years, have a bunch of them just floating around in my head because I've been reading a lot about the contemplative practices for a lot of years. So I sent those very inspiring memes along, all very elevating, all very motivating, all very inspiring. But I don't meditate for any of those reasons. I am not a natural meditator. I don't despise it as much as I used to. I don't get this panicked surge of energy rise up when I sit down that tells me I've got to go do something else. That doesn't happen anymore. But I am not one of those fortunate people who just laps this stuff up. I do it, and I have done for a lot of years. I meditate so that I don't screw up my life. And I meditate so that I don't screw up the lives of everybody I love. Because the circle and contemplative practice in particular helps us determine our yeses and our nos, and we all have unconscious rules that we live by. Those unconscious rules tell us this is how good people are supposed to live. This is what a good life is supposed to look like. And usually we pick that up from some source that might be a little suspect. Maybe not the way the best life, the good life, should be lived. But those rules, nevertheless, they sit down inside of us and they drive our yeses and they drive our nos. Now, maybe you're lucky. Maybe you had a great family of origin, and maybe your interaction with the society gave you an excellent set of unconscious rules. So consequently, maybe you never have afflictive emotions, and maybe your shadow side never gets poked. Your unconscious rules, just like mine, no matter how pretty they are, come from a shadow side, come from blind spot rules. They are truths, as you hear me say all the time, that are not true enough. They're true enough to keep us servicing them, but they're not true enough to build a life on. They tell us what our yes should be, and they tell us what our no should be, and they will often tell us yes or no when we shouldn't say yes or no. A few years ago, my kids got to the age where they had plenty to say about how Denise and I screwed them up. If you've got kids, just wait. Now, here's what they didn't factor in. They did not factor in how much worse it could have been. How much worse it could have been if I hadn't been meditating all those years, because there were a lot of times I caught myself veering into blind spot territory. So many times I did not go where my accumulated shadow self-instinct told me a good person should go. So I meditate so that I don't screw up my world. I meditate and I do the communal practices, and I do the learning, and I do the serving practices to help me discern what my yeses should be and what my nos should be. So I do hope you'll join me, 6:30 in the morning. We work the circle to get better at discerning the interior light. We work the circle to get better at making the hard choices. So indwelling divine, may it be so in us. Amen. All right, let's get out our phones because we all give online now. Yep. Point your camera at the QR code. It'll take you, or you can thumb type if you wish to. Go to our website, commonthreadchurch.org, and at the top there's a donate button. Lots of options, lots of ways to give. Now, because we have been a generous community, we are able to occupy this space. Odds I've been telling you, I don't know what the electrical is going to cost. I don't know why the Wi-Fi's down today, but we're going to end up getting all that stuff fixed. And we're able to consider doing all of those things. And we're going to be able to take care of our kids this year, be able to develop our groups around our teenagers, because you have been a generous lot. And you do keep in mind what I say every week, that there is good return on our investment when we invest in spiritual community. When we give our time and our energy and our love and our dollars, here's what the community does. It takes those resources, it amplifies them, and it gives them back to us in the form of an environment in which we thrive, in which we are transformed. Those stories that I began with this morning, they happen in this context, and that happens because we have become, are on our way to becoming, a community-owned community. So, again, on our website, it's about as easy to give as you can make it. Now, in a minute, we're going to dismiss the live stream. Do we have a live stream? I guess we're over here. We do. All right. Okay, so welcome. If you did come in, because sorry, something happened. We were down on the Wi-Fi. But anyway, we're going to do What Are You Thinking here in the room. And here's what you might not know, if you're just joining us, that this thing that we do is the distinguishing mark of our community. If someone says something about Common Thread, you know what those people do? They open up the floor after the lesson and they talk back to the preacher guy. And sometimes they tell him he's full of shit. And everybody seems okay with that. Well, we are doing the same thing on Zoom, and we would love to have you join. It turns out that we don't really grow listening to a talking head give words, but we do grow when we take concepts, when we integrate them into our lives through conversation, through shared dialogue, and so we invite you to that. You'll find the link on the notes on YouTube. You'll also find it on the front page of our website, and the password is, get ready, 1417, pause, replay, 1417. All right, we're going to dismiss those folks, and as we let them go, if you would, please put your hand on your heart and let us remember that we are, every one of us, carriers of the indwelling divine. That means we have in us what's often been called the fruit of the Spirit. Love is in us, as is joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness. They are in us. Shrouded, covered, yeah, that's true, but they're there. And let's look for opportunities, if you would, extend your other hand to our city, to share what's already in us with the people that we live and work and go to school with, looking for opportunities to repair and heal our worlds. Amen. God bless you all. You are dismissed. And you all, because we don't have tables back yet, this is our last week being a set